Put yourself into this situation. You're working as a safety team member and you're assigned the sanctuary. You're watching over as the congregation. They all have their heads bowed and they're in the middle of a prayer. When suddenly a man in the front row jumps to his feet and sprints towards the altar and physically attacks your pastor. Do you know what to do? Is your team prepared to deal with that kind of emergency? Today we're going to be breaking down the attack of the priest in that church in Spokane, Washington, and we're going to be discussing some of the mistakes they made, but more importantly, we're going to be discussing some lessons learned, some things that you and your team could do in order to prevent this from happening at your church. So this was Spokane, Washington on February 4th, 2025, so just like a week ago. And it occurred at the, I'm going to get this right, at the Cathedral of Our Lady of Lourdes. Nearly 400 worshipers had gathered for an evening of prayer. But in the middle of the service, just like we started with, a 40-year-old man, a transient with kind of a history of erratic behavior, suddenly rushed the altar and attacked the priest. This could happen at any church, and this attack was preventable. So let's break it down, and let's talk about how your team could act before it's too late. Key fact number one, the warning signs were missed. There were clear pre-attack indicators that were only discovered after reviewing the security footage after the event, and this is a common failure. Lesson number one, you must watch for behavioral cues in real time. Train your team to recognize agitation, nervous shifting, hands in the pockets, scanning the room, clenching fists. Assign somebody, if you have a camera system, assign somebody to monitor those cameras and give them a radio, and hopefully your team has radio too. So if they see somebody that's, has suspicious behaviors, potentially violent, they can get on the radio and say, hey, go check this out. And so you got the camera person watching. Hopefully your team should be patrolling the grounds, right? We need to be patrolling outside. We need to be in the lobby. We need to be in the highways and byways, the back hallways, the back stairwells. We need to be in these areas wherever people are and shouldn't be, checking it out, and we're watching people and we're looking for these pre-attack indicators. Next thing that we want to do, if we see somebody like that, we want to approach them. The earlier we approach them, the better, right? So they're suspicious. They're a little shifty. If we can stop this person, with a contact cover team, because we never approach a potentially violent person by ourselves, we make our approach, we contact with them, and it could be, hey, I'm Chris with the safety team. How are you doing? How can I help you? What's going on? Whatever. Whatever greeting works well for you. And then right away, you're going to be able to determine what kind of risk they may or may not be, right? If they're intoxicated or under the influence, obviously we have an issue, right? If they're off their meds and they got mental health issues, that's going to be detected. If they're up to no good, those things are going to be detected for the most part. And so that's why we want to make contact as early as possible. Obviously, if we contact them in the parking lot, great, right? We're way protecting the congregation. If we're stopping them in the lobby, great. If we're stopping them before they make it into the congregation, the sanctuary, great. The sooner we stop them, the better. Key fact number two is the attack went unchallenged until it happened. The individual, the attacker, sat in the front row, which is prime real estate for this kind of attack, and yet nobody was next to him. No safety team member was in position to stop this attack. Lesson number two, let's shadow suspicious individuals. If somebody comes into our church and they're suspicious and they're potentially violent, and maybe we don't intercept them in time to interact with them and kind of evaluate them for any sort of threat level, or maybe we do, and there's just not enough to act on, and they go inside the sanctuary, let's assign a safety team member to go in there and position themselves strategically in order to react should something occur. And along that same line there is this, is what about your safety team members in the sanctuary? They should also be positioned strategically to respond to any sort of attack that might occur. I'm kind of thinking that in the very front seat, the front row in a seat maybe along the aisle, if you got an aisle down the middle, that would be a good place to have a safety team member. because they're already in that intercept position, right? If somebody runs from the left, they can get up and they're right there in front of the stage. They can intercept. They come from the right, they can intercept. If somebody's running down or approaching through that, little aisle in the center, they're positioned to respond. So that might be some place you would want to do. Now, of course, this is based on your church's layout and your sanctuary's layout, but you get my point here. Let's think strategically about where our safety team members are sitting within the sanctuary so we can intercept attacks and respond to attacks should an attack occur in our sanctuary. So far, everything we covered are things that are covered in the safety member certification training that we offer online. It's about contact and cover. It's about spotting suspicious people. It's about spotting potentially violent people. It's talking about strategic approaches and all those kind of things. So I just want to encourage you, if you like what you're hearing so far, you need to check out the safety member certification. Key fact number 3, the safety team's response was disorganized. Multiple people rushed the stage and tried to take down this individual. And quite frankly, it was sloppy and the potential for injury was very high. Lesson number 3, train takedown techniques. There's 2 techniques that I think are extremely important. A lot of you, maybe with law enforcement background, military background, or maybe you have a background in martial arts, are probably very familiar with like the one-arm takedown, right? Where we're locking out the elbow, we're putting pressure on the upper arm, we're rotating a tight circle, and we're bringing them down to the ground. The problem is that technique has a high failure rate. So what we want to do, especially since we don't have the time to train all of our safety team members to be ninjas or to be MMA fighters, we want to base it on some things that are relatively easy to do. One of the things that I like, and I like a lot, is the 2-man or the 2-person takedown. That's basically 2 team members, 2 safety team members working together to get somebody down onto the ground. And so what I like is I like that high-low takedown. And some of you, if you've been in football, wrestling, or those kind of things, you already know what I'm talking about. This is where one safety team member goes down and wraps up the bad guy's leg, right? So they're reaching around, they're grabbing the upper part of the leg, so between the knees and below the hips, they're wrapping their arms around them, and they're holding those legs as hard as they possibly can. And their head is positioned towards their back, towards their backside, and they're just locking them up. And their job is just to work as an anchor. They're just holding that guy. The second team member who's engaging the top of the guy is now holding them, grabbing them, and then just pulling them down to the ground. And so we want them to be face first or, chest first down on the ground. And it's very easy to do. A 2-man takedown done that way is extremely easy, but it's something that we have to practice. So, deciding who goes high, who goes low, that's very simple. Whoever goes high, the other guy goes low. If your guy goes low, you go high. I mean, it's just, you take the one that hasn't already been taken. You take that high-low position. It's as simple as that. And if you think about our other training that we do where we have the contact cover team, where, maybe you're the contact guy and you're within that 6-foot reactionary gap, you're ready for, anything that could occur. It turns out the guy either attacks you or you see those pre-attack indicators. You don't have to wait for the guy to punch you in the mouth, right? And so you decide, hey, we got to take this guy down. And so you engage, or they engage you, and now you're in this wrestling match potentially. And that's when your partner comes in and takes whatever you didn't take. If you're not down around his ankles, down around the upper part of their legs, upper part of the legs, then he's taking the top, right? And they pull them down. And so we get them down, we get them under control. So let's talk about getting them under control. Now, obviously, with just 2 people, getting somebody under control and keeping them under control can be extremely hard. For the most part, what you're going to do is whoever locked up the legs is going to continue to lock up the legs. And I mean wrap yourself around those legs, hold it for dear life, use your body weight, whatever it is to keep those legs from moving. That job is relatively easy in comparison to the poor guy who's dealing with the top half of the body. right? We got two arms there. It's the hands that cause problems. And now you're fighting and wrestling with this guy, and it can be extremely difficult to maintain control. Hopefully this is where the rest of your team comes in. Hopefully this is where other people from your church will insert themselves to help. As they respond, then what they do is we want, in the end, what we're looking for, the ultimate end we're looking for is basically where they're spread eagle with their arms wide out, and we have one person assigned to every single limb. So that means, one guy on the left arm, one guy on the right arm, one guy on the left leg, one guy on the right leg. And if we're doing that, we're using all our strength to control one limb, which is fairly, I won't say easy to do, but it's easier to do than fight the whole man. We're just fighting one limb, and our other team members are fighting one limb. We got them under control. And by doing that, so we got them under control. What's good about this is a couple things. Probably a lot of you have heard about positional asphyxia, and that's when somebody's been fighting and there can be a lot of pressure put on their back or on their chest, their breathing, and that can cause them to, quite frankly, die. So we're not doing that. We're securing arms, we're securing legs. Nobody's on their back. Nobody's putting pressure on their chest. Nobody is, touching the spine. Nobody's touching the neck. Nobody's controlling the head or, worried about the head or putting pressure on the head or kneeling on their head, kneeling on their back, kneeling on their neck. We're not doing any of that. We're just one person per limb. And you can hold a person that way for quite a long time until the police get there and they slap on the cuffs and they take over the whole situation, right? Now, one thing that can happen, and some of you already know what I'm talking about here, is sometimes when you're trying to pull the arms out from underneath the person, what they'll do is they'll lock up their hands, hold their hands together, and just hold their arms inside. Now, for law enforcement, that's a problem, right? Because we're trying to get that arm out and get the handcuff, on them. The thing is, for a safety team, who cares, right? If they're just holding their arms together and they're preventing you from pull out, you still have your two safety team members that are assigned those arms, and you can't do that. But what you can do is put lots of pressure on the shoulder and lots of pressure on that elbow. And then you're prepared if that arm comes out or becomes loose, then you grab it, you take it, you hold it, and you control it. But as long as they're sitting like this, who cares? I don't really care. We're trying to just maintain control here until the police get here, and they can handcuff them and take over from that position. So the key then, of course, is obviously we have to do drills on this kind of stuff. This is not something that you watch a video and it's all going to work together. What you need to do is you need to bring your team together. Get some mats, have some basic training on how to do this two-person takedown, the high-low takedown. Very easy. But it's something we need to do a couple times and practice it. The same thing about controlling per limb. Let's do that too. Let's practice that. So as other team members show up to that scene where you've done the two-person takedown, they know how to assist you. So thank you so much for being here today. Hit subscribe, and hey, let's be careful out there.